other half, I'm going to be kind of winging it. But I am really appreciative to be here, and I think it's very cool that this organization exists. I've been kind of an observer from the sidelines of this organization. I've definitely, as you'll come to hear from my story, I've, definitely had my share of struggles with alcohol and drug addiction and mental health. I initially actually joined CHOW hoping to try and get a couple of other friends that I had that are still struggling with alcoholism, who are in the industry, trying to get them into an environment such as CHOW that really focuses on helping people in the industry. Doesn't look like they came to watch the talk tonight, but regardless, I am very happy to be here and happy to be talking to you guys. So yeah, as Aaron said, I spent a good deal of time in the restaurant industry. I spent about a dozen years in the service industry until about March. I moved up to Fort Collins to take a management job with Old Chicago, and ended up being laid off 4 days after moving up here. And I had been kind of feeling that it was maybe time to do something new. So that was kind of the universe maybe giving me the boot into doing something new. But still feel a great affinity and bond with the service industry, and I don't know that I'm out of the service industry for good. So anyways, that said, I'd like to just kind of go through a little bit of my story, through the history of kind of what brought me to where I am today, and then kind of share some of the things that I have found that make life worth living today. So I'm going to start kind of in the middle of the story. 2:30 a.m. on January 8th, 2018, I was a week away from turning 34 years old, and I wanted to die. I was living with my parents at the time, had been for about a year. I had reached that point in my addiction where I had no other options. So I was living with my parents, and had less than $20 to my name at that point. And I was driving home from the bar at 2:30 a.m. Drunk and high on cocaine, and I decided that was the time to end it. So I attempted to take my life by hitting the concrete barrier on I-25 doing 65 miles an hour. That didn't work, thankfully. And I came to floating in an airbag, and the police, Denver police, pulling me out of this car. When I realized that my attempt to take my own life had not worked, my next thought was maybe I could get these Denver cops to shoot me if I just start mouthing off, which I did. And again, that didn't work. I ended up in jail. Thankfully, they had more restraint than I might have. But I ended up in jail and spent 3 days in jail on suicide watch and on medication detoxing from alcohol. So in trying to think of what led me to that point, I look back at my childhood and feel like everything seemed happy enough as a child. I came from a upper middle class background, and really didn't feel like, at the time it felt like a great childhood. I would later find out that, there was a good deal of alcoholism in the family. But, I think my biggest struggles then were that I felt like I never quite fit in, and I felt like I never really lived up to my dad's ideals. He wanted me to be a fantastic athlete like he was, and I never felt like I lived up to that. So that was kind of where I started developing my narrative for my life. As a young adult, I saw a psychiatrist about some ADD issues. And this psychiatrist told me, well, you know, I think you have clinical depression. We're going to put you on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds. And so over the course of a couple of years through this psychiatrist, I tried every antidepressant under the sun and never found anything that seemed to work. You know, the side effects were either worse than the issue that I was trying to fix, or they just left me feeling numb. And what this added to my narrative then at that point was this thought that, okay, my brain is broken and I need to be medicated. So over the course of these couple of years of trying all these different pharmaceuticals and finding that nothing worked, I realized, you know, I decided in my life then that I needed to stop taking the pharmaceuticals. But what that left me with was this hole where my narrative that I had created still told me I needed to be medicated. So I turned to alcohol and drugs. At that time, I started college and even started working in the professional field that I was studying in school. And I got sober for a time. I drank pretty hard for about 1.5 years. Then I got sober for about 1 year. But ultimately, I couldn't make it stick. Went back to drinking and drugs. And when drinking and drugs got in the way, I decided, you know what? I'm an artist. I'm just going to drop out of school. I'm going to drop out of the professional life, and I'm going to start painting. And I did. You know, I started just painting and drinking all the time and smoking a lot of pot. And I discovered, you know what? I can work in restaurants. It doesn't require me to be up early. It doesn't really require me to commit to anything. It seemed like an easy way to kind of make a few bucks while trying to be this starving artist. You know, so I then kind of transitioned my narrative of my life to being this starving artist. And that narrative told me that drugs and alcohol helped me to be more creative. From there, I had the opportunity to move to Asia, which I did. I thought maybe, you know, maybe this would provide a fresh perspective and get me out of the rut. And what I found is when I got to Asia, I pretty quickly found all of the local bars and found who had the good club drugs, you know, and I kind of continued on with that narrative of being the artist, but I rolled in, well, I'm a traveler and I'm an expatriate living the expat life, and this is what you do. A year later, I left Asia, broke, and I left a wake of wreckage behind me. I had moved over there with a girlfriend, gotten over there, started drinking really heavily, and cheated on that girlfriend. And then started dating the girl that I cheated on the first girlfriend with, and then cheated on her. And, you know, it was just ended up being a pretty reckless time in my life where I hurt a lot of people. But yeah, when I left Asia, came back to the States and kind of felt like it was starting over. But even then, I couldn't escape the alcohol and the drugs. And when I returned to Colorado, I got my first DUI about a month after returning from Asia. Over the next several years, I would try and go back into 9-to-5 jobs, but could never quite make those work long term, again, because I would oversleep by being hungover, or still drunk in the morning. So I could never hold on to jobs, 9-to-5 jobs. And it seemed like restaurants again were a place where I could kind of just slide by. I heard it said once, and it kind of stuck with me, and this period of my life really kind of exemplifies this. I heard it said that healthy people will alter their lifestyle to meet their goals, whereas addicts alter their goals to meet their lifestyle. And that's what that period of my life really became, was continually dropping my bar so that I could just continue to get messed up. And at this time in my life, the narrative that kind of ran through my head was, well, this job didn't work out because of this, or I quit this job in a rage because I wasn't making enough money. So it was always somebody else's problem. I couldn't yet look inward and see where the blame truly lied. And another part of that narrative is still refusing to even identify that I had a problem. And, I would think things like, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I don't drink in the morning. But the truth was, I was never awake in the morning, but I would still wake up at noon or 1 in the afternoon and go to the bar and have 3, 4, 5 drinks before going to work. But, there was always a justification, always some way that I could fit this narrative of my life to fit where I was and fit why I wasn't doing better in my life. Through all this, I had begun dating a woman in 2015 that I fell madly in love with. And on our first date, I even remember us both talking about how we could never date somebody who didn't drink. And that kind of would turn out to be an omen, as we were together for about 3 years before things got really bad. But we both struggled with alcohol. And after about 3 years, we broke up after numerous fights, screaming matches, and eventually I ended up back at my parents' house. I was broke. I had broken up with this woman that I was madly in love with, and that's what took me to my second DUI when I tried to take my life. And it was at that time that I really internalized that I needed to change. My brain finally knew that I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. That I would die if I continued to drink and use drugs. So that's when kind of my narrative began to change. And I tried to start getting clean, to some success, but I would still put myself in situations I shouldn't be in and end up relapsing. But around that time, I began seeing that woman again, Lindsay. And this time we both committed to trying to make a relationship work. And we acknowledged that we both needed to be sober for the rest of our lives if we were going to spend the rest of our lives together. And things started looking up. A few months after that, I had been sober for a few months, and we were really trying to work on our relationship. And I went to the Bacon and Beer Festival at Mile High Stadium, not willingly, but because my boss had given it to me as a prize for winning a sales competition at work. And I had asked my boss if I could graciously bow out as I was trying to be sober. And he told me no, my attendance and my working the festival for the company would be required. So sure enough, that Bacon and Beer Festival kicked off a 3-day bender for me, where I fell back into alcohol and cocaine. Didn't really sleep for 3 days. But coming out of that, that was my rock bottom. And that was when I realized that there is no maybe just a little bit. There is no maybe just one for me. And I've been sober ever since now, going on about 2.5 years. And the new narrative that I began focusing on at that time was that quitting alcohol and drugs certainly might be really hard to do, but it's even harder to continue living the life that I had been living. And I used to think that who I was, the person that I was, my personality and the core of my being was driven by things that had happened to me along the way and not by who I was choosing to be. And I think that's the biggest fallacy that I built in my life that allowed me to go down the dark path that I went down and to destroy myself to the point of being so close to death on multiple occasions. And so that really started me thinking about how do I change and how do I fix this. And what I kind of happened upon is that it's all about my narrative. So you may have heard me continue to mention that word throughout all this, is narrative. And to me, that's what it's all about. To me, every single one of us is a creative person. Every single one of us is an artist. Even if you don't feel like an artist, even if you don't paint, you don't draw, you don't sculpt, or you don't cook, every single one of us is still a creative person. Every one of us is still an artist because we're continually crafting this narrative that is our life. And to me, it's those words, it's that narrative which can drive your life in any direction you want to go. It's said that the universe is infinite and full of infinite possibility. And I believe that. And I believe that it is our own internal monologue. It's our own narrative that we're writing for our lives that dictates where we end up. So my new narrative now is that I'm a person in recovery, and I will always be in recovery, and that I can't forget that. My new narrative dictates that I be open about my past and about my struggles to everyone. I no longer feel shame for the things I've done and for the person I was, because I know that if I can take who that was and I can share that experience with others, then I never know who I may help. And sort of an anecdote of that, I guess, is about 1.5 years after getting sober. I'm going to back up the train here just a skosh. The woman that I committed to getting sober with, that we recommitted to a relationship with, I am happy to report that we have been together since. And we, in fact, just got married 3 weeks ago. Both of us about 2.5 years sober. But about 1.5 years after getting sober, her brother down in Durango overdosed on pain medications and died 3 times, but was resuscitated 3 times. And we were asked to go down to Durango and help try and convince him to get help do an intervention. And it felt then that all of my struggles, everything that I had been through, as soon as I expressed all of those in this intervention, they felt like they no longer hurt. They felt like they had a purpose. And so I'm really grateful that I can now focus on that narrative of my life of wanting to help others and be, a guiding light for people who may still be struggling. Some of the tools that I use now in order to, avoid temptation is, to me, a big one is just recognizing that I don't have to climb the entire mountain. Whatever it is that I'm struggling with, whatever it is that's a challenge in my life, I don't have to climb the whole mountain today, but I can choose to stay on the path. And that's something that I meditate on daily. I would say it helps having the support of sober people in my life, and leaning on those people. Not just my wife, although we do speak often about our sobriety and about the struggles that led us to our sobriety, but also other family members and friends that I have that are sober. Just reaching out to them, even if something doesn't feel bad, if I'm starting to feel even just a little discomfort about something, I know that's probably time to reach out and say, hey, I'm going through this. What do you think? Yeah, I think ultimately the takeaway that I have and that I would love to impart with you is, again, just this idea of paying attention to what is your narrative, what is the story that you're writing for yourself. Pay attention to that story, pay attention to the words that you're crafting your own life to be, and remember that the universe is full of infinite possibility and you can be anything you want to be. So I appreciate it, and I think with that I will turn it over to you guys.
Right on, Chris. Thank you very much.